level up your Power Query game, your custom functions. First, I will a little bit add a few more points to introducing myself. My name is Štěpán Rešl, which is quite unpronounceable for most of countries in the world. So you can call me Steve. It's much more easier. If you would like to stay in touch, you can find here my LinkedIn, Twitter, X, how it's called today. And hopefully you are also able to see on the bottom little pane where I have some icons. I'm co-founder of a company called Data Brothers in the Czech Republic, which is a small country in the middle of Europe. As was mentioned, I'm one of the Microsoft Most Valuable Professionals on a data platform, and I run an English blog called Data Meerkat. So that's all about myself, and now I will head back to my session itself, and I will start with the functions itself, because we are Power BI developers, so we're working with a Power Query quite heavily, and we're using all the functions that are inside, mostly. Okay, I think no one actually ever used all of them, because there are lots of functions that we're not capable to use, like web action.request, which is a special function that is actually inside the Power Query, but you can use it mostly only when you're developing the custom connectors, etc., etc., etc. So there are much more complications about that. But to the functions, we know that it's a basic principle of Power Query, because everything that we are doing that is by functions. So if I will try to frame them a little bit, functions can look like a text .from, which is conversion function from something to the text type, or table.select rows, which we know as a filter mostly inside the Power Query. And we also have here something like date.year when we would like to extract from date or our year, and much, 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 much more. I think today we have something around 300 different functions already, which is insane. We have like enormous amount of functions that we can actually use. And these functions have something in common. First, they are already predefined. So we can just grab them, use them, and they will work. Then they are mostly very easy to use. They were predefined to actually just to put data inside of them, and they will do everything what they were created for. They are pretty well documented. I know there are some functions when you would argue me that no, these functions are definitely not well documented. But I will show you a little trick that maybe can be handy, because usually I'm not going to the Learn or other websites to find documentation of functions. I can get it directly inside Power Query itself. And it's much more easier, much more quicker, and it can help me to find a solution that I'm looking for. And most of them are actually prepared very precisely for the error handling. So that's something that is great to have in our minds, that native functions are already there, they're easy to use, well documented somehow, and prepare for most of error handlings. Because when we will start creating our own functions, and I will explain you why you would like to do that, you will find out that actually think about all possible scenarios can be quite complicated, and sometimes you can get into some position where you forgot on some error handling and you will actually need that. So after that, you're very happy that regular functions are already prepared for this handling. Okay, so what's the main difference between normal function that we have and the custom functions? First, custom functions are developed by us, by developers. So it's just up to us what will be inside. it's completely in our hands. And I'm very happy that we received this possibility to have something like user-defined functions. And I'm very intentionally saying it like a user-defined functions to have it in similarity with a Python. Because actually, yeah, it's just about us as users, what we will create it. These functions can be extremely complicated and they can do extreme work that we don't want to be writing from scratch again and again and again. Then they are mostly undocumented, and that's a little bit pity because we are able to document them. But lots of people that create the custom functions are not documenting them because they think, okay, everyone will be able to read my code and they will be able to directly understand what's happening there. No, that's not true. Sorry. Even if you would have every step inside the function very well named, still it will be very hard to understand for normal user that would like to just use your function. So it's very great to document them and spend the time on that. And then they are not part of any or next solution, which is actually something where I would like to see some improvement in future years. Like, would be great to have ability to create our own libraries for custom functions and then brought them directly into the Power Query to be able to reuse them or create something like company libraries for Power Query functions. It would be very great, very handy, because I think most of people are actually quite upset with capabilities to extract SharePoint files or mostly anything from a SharePoint to the Power BI. Because, okay, if you would use SharePoint.contents, we know that it will actually call for all data inside the SharePoint. So based on how large the storage on behind is actually used, our response will be received. Thanks to that, there were some developers like Imke from BI Consultants who create absolutely astonishing custom function to be able to grab just the data from the SharePoint that you need and bring them to your solution. So we know that there are these possibilities. They are unfortunately not inside the native functions. And then every time you need to go find a solution, grab it, put it into your preparing data set to be able to use it again. So hopefully one day we will have something like custom libraries. It would be very helpful. But now, no. And we need to draw them every single time, again and again and again and again. But why we would like to use something like a custom functions? Because that's actually the question. We know that we have here quite amount of basic function that we can use. So is there any case to actually create custom functions? Yes, of course. There are actually three main scenarios. First of them is reusability. When you create some custom function, you're mostly creating them to prevent reusing same part of a code again and again. You would like to have it prepared and on a snap be able to use that. Next to that, we have definitely the readability. And I will have very, very quick showcase where you would be able to agree with me that they can support readability very, very highly. And they can be very nicely scoped, because it's just up to us if we will create function on a query level or inside the query. So if our function will be completely new query inside the data set, or if it will be custom function only and only for one query, and it will be inside its code. So it's just up to us how we would like to treat them. And in that case, okay, it will require a little bit more complexity for us, but on the end, it will have very huge impact. If I will stay a little bit longer with the reusability, when we create some Power Query code, we know that it's just a script, and we can copy paste it to mostly any file, like even into the text file. So it can be stored there. Quite a lot of people are actually not storing them inside the text files, but in some files.m or files.pq, and they are sharing that through a GitHub with others inside their repositories. Because of that, maybe to your mind can come up the idea, okay, and am I somehow able to even create these functions outside the Power Query, or it's just Power Query related and I'm not able to create them anywhere else? Actually, inside the Visual Studio Code, we have the extension for Power Query language. So if you want to, you can be developing and even formatting full Power Query code out of the Power Query and then just grab the code and bring it inside. It's one way how I am actually developing my custom functions, because most of my custom functions that I'm creating, I'm also sharing with the community, and I'm creating them inside the Visual Studio Code, inside my Git repository, and sharing them to the rest. I will get into that Visual Studio Code extension later, but because I have here something about that readability. If you look on this code, you can see that we're adding the new column called duration in a years. And we have here some wild function that actually uses the list.generate to adding months to some date, unless it's same like a today. And in that and for that, it will also create a counter. Then it sums all the counters, so by the ones, and you're dividing by a 12 to have some approximation close to the year and rounding to the 2. Is it readable? It's very hard to read, doesn't it? And even when it's formatted, currently it's formatted to at least have it on separate in a separate steps on a separate rows, but unfortunately still it's very hard to read. If I will a little bit change it, and I will grab this part, create custom function out of this part, it can on the result looks only just like this. And now it's much more readable. We know that we are adding the custom column called duration in a years by a function called get duration in a years, and we're passing the date. That's all. Because somewhere in the model, we've already defined our function called get duration in a years. And it's just up to us if it will be, as I said, the query itself, or if it will be inside the query. That's exactly what I was talking right now, that they can be private, so only scoped for the query, or shared, it's inside completely new query, and we can use them directly. But is there anything else that is good to know about the custom functions before we finally get to how to create them and how to use them? Yes, there are some points that I would like to point out. First, if you would look on these two functions, one of them is a native one of them is a custom one. The native one is actually using some pre-text, which is actually like a library. It's like, okay, look inside the text library and extract from that the function called from. That's something how we can look on these functions, because it will help you to actually find out if we are in a proper library and we would like to work with a proper standard. On the other hand, in custom functions, we are not able to create this library the same way as they are for native functions, but we can create something similar to libraries. I will show you. Then we have some more differences. First, that return of a custom function can be literally anything, unless it's scoped that it will be only table or only record, only list. Function itself can even return another functions, which can be a little bit mind-blowing, but I will show you that it's actually possible and how to deal with that. You can reference functions without the brackets on the end. And if you do that, it will show you the documentation of that function, but it needs to be called in a separate step. It cannot be inside some other function. Then, if you would have a double brackets after the function name, it can still be a valid function. If there's some function that is actually returning other functions, you can directly call inserted function by using a second pair or third, fourth, it depends how many layers of functions are inside generated. You can just use these layers of brackets to be able to use what's inside of that. And some native functions also ask you to define your custom functions inside. And quite often, we are not defining custom functions, but we're using a little bit shortcut, like each, name of a column, and the expression. That's also defining for a custom function, but it's just a shortcut for normal custom function defining. But when I'm talking about defining the custom functions, the basic defining is pair of brackets with a rocket and the function body. That's completely basic how to create a function. And if I would go to the Power BI, we can start with it and we can try to create some custom functions on our own. Okay, I will go for new query for a blank one. And I will say, okay, create a custom function that will return 1. As you can see, it really worked. And just by inserting the pair of brackets and the rocket, we're able to have a function. In the queries, custom function will be shown as a fx. And if I would go for invoke, it will return me the 1. If I would like to add some input, so user can actually insert something into my function, I just need to put it into my brackets. So if it will be like a x and u, I can just multiply them. And as you can see, I've directly received possibility to enter these parameters. Of course, previous usage of a function is now returning an error because no arguments were passed. So, okay, if I will define inside that I would like to have a 10 and 5, I will again receive my result. So it can be very, very easy, and defining the function doesn't have to be inside the let and in expression. It can lay completely on its own. So if I will remove that and I will let just the function itself here, it will still work without any error. So I don't need to define function inside let and in expression, and even function itself doesn't need to require any let and in expression. This is completely basic, like how to create the function. If I would like to scope it a little bit and add user ability, only use proper types while they're inserting something into my variables or my parameters, I can define my type of the functions. So I will return and I will say, this will be a number And let's say that this will be the text. And before I will multiply them because it would drop into the error, I will use a number.from and I will convert it again. Now, inside the example, for the parameters, you can see that here's example 1 to 3, and here's ABC. Now it's returning the error because, yeah, 5 is a text, which is also first thing that will help you to prevent inner error created inside the function. Just by defining the data types of your parameters, you're already requesting user to use a proper types when they are inserting that, which can be extremely helpful. So I've just dropped it back and it's a 5. I will a little bit change that and I will say if number.from is more than x, then u, else x. Why? Because now the result of our function can be once a number and second once the text, which can cause lots of errors in your models. Someone unmuted? Like someone would like to ask about something? No?
No.
Okay.
By the way, if someone have any question, just raise your hand, unmute yourself, or just send it in the chat.
Yeah, exactly. So I will just try that. I will drop here not a 5, but a 50. You can see it, I've received 50, and the function of invoked function changed to ABC. If I will drop it back, it will be 10 and 1, 2, 3. Using functions like this inside your solution will cause you lots of troubles. Because if it's returning once number and then a text, there will be lots of issues in case of data clarity. Because at the end, your column will need to have be all the text or all the numbers or the general, which is not good in any way. So definitely it's great to also use this space between the brackets and the rocket, because here you can define the result type of the function. So if I will say, hey, return it every time as a number. So you can see that here inside the function definition, the function will be returned as a number. I will go back to the invoked function. Now I will try to change from 5 to 50. And we will receive another error, but that we would supposed to see. The error that is actually telling us that, hey, the result of the function should be a number, but you're passing a text into that. This will help you as a developer to actually think of that result should every single time has the same data type, which is really required. So let's go back, fix that, number from, and now we don't have any issue. So we will be able to use them. And the result can be actually anything. It doesn't have to be a number, text. It can even be a complex type. So it can be a table. So now it's definitely not returning a table. So let's define that as a table. Type table. Result be a number, and we will combine that a bit. And as you can see, we've received the result. Now it's returning, oh yeah, because it's not a list of a lists. Yep. Now we've received the table with a proper data type that is actually returned because we've already predefined it. if we would like, we can do the same for the end. And now it's just up to us what we will pass to that, because still it will return a table. But what if somehow we would receive an error? We still would like to got the table, at least with the result, hey, this is an error. So let's wrap it up completely, and I will finally open the advanced editor. And we will need the lines, a little bit of white spaces, to be able to at least see what's happening. If, then else, and I will wrap it with a try. With the otherwise. And the result will be completely the same. But now it will be just null. It will be blank. So we can pass something that will cause an error, and currently it can be even just done that I will remove this number from. And you can see that our result that we're receiving is actually the null. So that's something that I was talking when I said that our functions depend on us if we would implement some error handling inside of that, and definitely try to define them. I know that lots of people actually use something like Power Query formatter. Thanks for sharing it here. I will show you my preferred way how to format the functions. I will grab the code. I will copy paste it. Open the Visual Studio Code. Oh, sorry, I don't want to use Copilot right now. And I will hit format. That's all. Because once you have the extension for Power Query, you can directly use their formatting tool. And this capability to format any code even without the internet connection can be also very handy. Okay, I will get back to the presentation once again, because we've already tried to define here that we have x as a number, u as a number, and the result. Then, because it's still not all, we are able to have two different types of unsorted parameters, the required one and the optional one. And you possibly know this idea from the basic functions inside the Power Query, that if you would go for something like table.group for group by, there are some parameters that are optional, and it's just up to you if you would use them or not. Can we define them inside the custom functions? Of course we can. So I will get back into my code and I will say, hey, oh, you know what? I will use another query. Now, I would like to do it from scratch. And I will say, x is mandatory, so it will be a number. Then this one will be also mandatory. And then I would like to have a z as an optional parameter. To be able to define optional parameter, you need to start with word called optional. So optional z as a number. Result will be also the number. And now I can do our multiplying. And if I would go for 1 and 2, you will directly drop into the error. And do you know why? Because currently our null that is passed into the optional parameter is actually the null. And multiplying the null is nonsense. If I would drop here the 5, it will work. So once you will start using optional parameters, you need to be aware of their existence. So then it's very great to start thinking of about your functions. If you would use steps, like in a let or in, or you will define it directly, or you will use a read code. Because I can say, hey, if dz is not a null, then z, okay, I have dropped the bracket here, else it will be just 1. So we will not multiply that by anything that we don't need. And we will just wrap it and done. Now I don't need to have it, our third parameter, and still the result will be working. There's little issue with the optional parameters, because first you're defining the mandatory ones, then you're defining optional ones. So there can be much more optionals. So optional A as text, and still it will work. It's just up to you. You can even see that here will be added the name optional. But if you would try to define another mandatory after starting defining the optional, you will receive an error from a defining of a function. So I will use here B as a mandatory one, so no word optional before, as table. And we've received an error because you cannot have required argument following the optional arguments. Be aware of that every time you're defining optional parameters at the end. And there also one more issue that is good to be aware of. If I will grab the A before the Z, and I will go for my query where I'm using this function, I would like to call just for the latest optional parameter. I still need to somehow return something for the A. So there will need to be at least null. So now I can use a Z where will be 10. If I will not define a null, I will receive an error because no, you don't pass me anything and I don't have none inside my capabilities. So at least null needs to be passed. So first we're defining the required ones, then the optional ones. For more complex functions, we can use mostly anything inside the body itself. And this is exactly one way how to deal with the issue that I've showed you previously. We can use the separate step or separate variable where we will be storing the result of our optional parameter and then using that, or we can directly pass it into the VL or directly pass it into the calculation itself. I will stay here for a moment because quite often we are also encountering the functions in different ways. I will try with defining very quick list. So we have here the list, and now I would like to use something like list.select. List.select is asking us at the first parameter for a list. Okay, we will be passing that. And then for a selection as a function, this selection is quite often used as a each. And we will say, okay, if it's less than 500, return that. Okay, you know what, less than 10, so it will be seenable. So it will go through all the points and it will be used. But I thought it asked us for a function. Why we are using the each? Because each and underscore can be actually just a shortcut to a function. If I would go for function itself directly inside, and I will bypass the underscore, we will receive completely the same result. Or I can bypass the x, and still. So you can see that each and underscore is actually just the same way how to explain these type of functions inside the normal functions or inside other ways. For me, I much more prefer to using, okay, that will be hard word. It depends, but quite often, especially these days, I prefer this type of writing it down, because in that case, I have completely under my control what will be X or my passing parameter. Because if I would have more functions layered inside, the underscore can be translated even into the row, and it can have some collisions between. So for me, it's quite often much easier to define it this longer way, but in that case, I will have it completely under my control, and I will know what will happen. We also know that we can define functions just by right-clicking on mostly any query and saying create a function. This is a very specific type of how to create a function, because if you do so, it will grab your code. I will call it like list filter. And it will create a function and the query itself. They are actually chained together. What I mean by that, if I would go for this list, okay, invoke that. This invoke function returns from 1 to 9. I will change something in query 3, and you would say, okay, the query 3 is independent list. Even if I would go for view, you can see that query 3 is really independent, but unfortunately it's not, because we've created from this query this function. So from 10, I will go to the 20, and if I will check invoke function 3, it will be the same, because every change inside this query will be directly propagated into our function. But if I would like to write something inside or even open the advanced editor, it will tell me that if you do so, you will break this chain and you will not be able to return it. So how am I actually able to add some parameter inside? And that's the fun, that's where the fun begins, because if I would go for a normal parameter and I will say max value, I will drop here the 20, the type, and yep, it will be a decimal number, and the max value I will use in a query 3. My list filter will grab this parameter and drop it into the brackets. So my invoke function will now be an error, because I can drop here mostly anything and it will filter itself. But I have here one parameter that will propagate into the Power BI service when I will publish that, and I will be able to change that. That's something that I don't want to do in many cases. And quite often it will happen. If you would go for the more, for a folder, I will grab just a link to the folder and I will go for CSVs. If I will go for them, I will hit a transform, and you know what? I would like to combine all the binaries together. It will create something incredibly similar, because it will create some helper functions with one specific CSV on the top, the function that will have inside a parameter, but this parameter one will be completely unusable, because it's typed binary, and binary type parameters are unchangeable inside the Power BI service. So it will just create you the gray box in Power BI service where you can change it, and it's just there. And quite often they are combined into the sample files, and currently it's great that I at least have it from a 0 index and then a content, because in that case I know that every time I will receive this first binary file. But if it would be propagated by something like this, and it is because it's inside the source, it will be immutable. So if I will change, or if I would use some parameters to get to this folder, still I need to be thinking of that I need to also change this folder files or this folder path. So usually I'm not clicking at any cases on combining files, because it will create lots of trash inside your queries that you need to remove. So definitely what I would recommend you to do is where it started. It started as a CS Swiss. Yep. Start at early beginning, clear all that you need or all that you want. Grab just the content or even transform it directly, because from the function that is created here, I can just grab it and I will return back. Start with something very easy like an extension, transform, uppercase, and now I can drop my custom function into the process because it will be the content. And custom function can also be dropped here against the text upper. And it can, okay, it's now using the parameter, so it will be just underscore and each. And now I'm passing even more. And you can see that I've just created a custom function because it is. It's each and somehow used of underscore. And as I said to you, it's just a shortcut. I've just dropped the custom function and directly transformed the content into the tables. So if I would just go for content, I can directly have a list, and by list dot combine, no, sorry, table combine. Yep. And by a table combine, I can directly grab all my tables and combine them into the one. This is still just some cases of custom function, because what we've done is overwriting native behavior of a Power Query and extending by our logic into some scenarios that are not here for us normally, like doing it in one step, but we can, and it can help you quite hard. So if I will return for the presentation for one more, it will be because of the documentation of the functions. And I said that this can be very tricky because lots of custom functions are actually not well documented or even not documented at all. And because of that, I would like to help you with first ability to find out that every function is documented directly inside the Power Query. So let me open the query and let's use text at, for example. And without the brackets, it would return you the name, the description, the showcase of function and parameters, and then the examples. And this is for every single function that you can create. So even table at key, you can find here how to use it. And quite often the examples inside the Learn or Microsoft websites are very similar. So this is something that I'm actually using because it can be very, very handy. And I think if I would go for web.contents, oh, no, Actress, web, you can even find here all necessary, required, supported things that you can drop into the content or into the options itself. So this is extremely helpful. You can see that you can even define the timeout, and here are some examples how to use them, what it will returns. So this is absolutely awesome, how to get the documentation, but how to create documentation on yourself. I will grab, for example, this function, and right now I will need to do little changes, and sorry, I will maybe just use that, and I will, because we're a little bit running out of the time, I will do that inside the Visual Studio Code. Okay, no, I would like to use the output, so I will drop it inside. This will be my function that I will use, and after the output, I will use documentation, where I would like to define the record, and the documentation that we are actually passing to a custom function is nothing else than this type of a record. You can see that GitHub Copilot is incredibly smart currently to be able to tell me, okay, you will need a documentation data name, which is a specific metadata name for real name of a function, documentation description, the long description, and examples. I will try to grab that and return it into the in, but I need to somehow pass it to our function. So it will be by value.replace type. And as you can see, output, which is the name of a step where we have a function, and we will be replacing the type, and that's not correct because we need to pass value metadata, and to value metadata we will be finally passing value type to the output. Oh, come on. Output, and documentation will be here on itself. Definitely about this. Now it just needs to be closed, and if I will grab that, drop it into the Power Query, and we're passing to a few more. 2 arguments were passed into the function, where just 1. Okay, value replace type. There will be the output, value metadata, value type output, and the documentation. This should be proper. And here is also the result. I have it. Oh yeah, not the metadata, replace metadata, sorry. Replace metadata is the function that I'm looking for. Yep. So after replacing this metadata, I'm able to see directly for my function the similar result as inside the normal documentation that we would receive from the Microsoft. There are quite a lot of possibilities that you can actually do inside this documentation, and because it can be quite tricky to remember most of them, or even just remember this crazy stuff to create, I have something for you. I will go to my website, to a templates, and there are not just the SVGs, but also Power Query custom function template, where this code is already prepared. So you can just copy it right here, drop it into your code. Everything has been already described, so it's just up to you what you will use. And let's call it, here will be the X, and U. Result doesn't need to be, this will be X, it will be U. You can even use the init step and multiply that just to quick showcase, and voila. You can just fill this template with your function and you can directly start using that. There are much more capabilities in documentations because some of functions also give you ability to choose. So if there are some, I'm thinking about the function that would actually support that. But for some functions, if you would go there, there will be really the Dropbox where you can select something, and you can also predefine that for your functions. But it's not like you're restricting using other values. Unfortunately, it's just easier possibility for end user to choose. But to be honest, will you ever be going directly into this function, filling it with what is needed, and then invoking? No, you will not. In 99% of the cases, you will go and you will call your function directly like this, dropping the parameters inside. So I don't want you hold it back from creating that support for allowed values, documentation.allowed values if you would be searching for that, but it will not prevent from anything. So my recommendation is focus on normal parameter insights, on handling the errors itself that can come up from your code, and use all the types reasonably. I think that, yeah, here's even the showcase, how it can looks like. It is the text encoding. I think it's in a CSV. I will just try it. It's CSV document, CSV document. Yeah, the encoding, the choosing, but you can drop here mostly anything. It will just cause an error. Oh, come on. Yep. So you now have the template that you can use. Here's also the link to a template if you would like to, but I think I've seen that in a chat. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's all for now. Thank you so much for the attention.